Hello, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak today about my research in physical activity and brain health. Today, I would like to share our research findings as they relate to how physical activity can impact brain and cognitive health in free living environments. And free living environments are places where people's natural environments, where they can engage in their typical everyday activities without the instruction from researchers or coaches, etc. So just the places where people live in their community. We also want to explore how we can help older adults to exercise independently to promote their brain health using mobile health technology such as heart rate trackers. And finally, we will close by discussing considerations for how to culturally adapt interventions to promote brain health to work with Hispanic or Latina older adults. So a recent Lancet report suggested that up to 45% of dementia risk can be attributed to a combination of modifiable risk factors, such as education, cardiovascular, metabolic risk factors, sensory loss, and behaviors such as smoking, drinking alcohol, and being physically inactive or socially isolated. I will focus the rest of my talk on physical activity and its association to brain health, since that is the research that I have been conducting over the past several years. Research conducted under supervised conditions, for example, in a lab setting or with coaches or personal trainers supervised, has shown that physical activity and exercise are linked to brain health and cognitive benefits in older age through various mechanisms, including increased blood flow to the brain, increased neurotrophic factors that help the brain to maintain neuronal health and support learning. However, we don't know if the brain health benefits of physical activity extend to free living environments where people exercise without supervision, since most of the studies have been done under supervised conditions. Fortunately, mobile health devices such as accelerometers and heart rate trackers can help us answer this important question while people exercise in their natural everyday environments. So let's talk about how physical activity can impact brain and cognitive health in free living environments, which are the places, again, where people live and exercise independently rather than coming to the lab or having supervised group sessions. So in a study conducted with my colleague and postdoc mentor, Dr. Cristina Warenga here at UC San Diego, we wanted to explore if free living physical activity measured with research-grade accelerometers, which are these little red devices that I'm showing here on the slide, could help if we could see if this everyday activity would be related to cerebral blood flow or the amount of blood flow going to the brain in healthy older adults in their everyday environments. So we asked a group of older adults to wear this accelerometer around their waist for 1 week while they perform their everyday activities. We then obtained brain MRIs or magnetic resonance imaging to quantify the cerebral blood flow and look for associations of different levels of physical activity with cerebral blood flow in different parts of the brain. We were interested in cerebral blood flow because it's very important for proper functioning of the brain, and also because lower levels of cerebral blood flow have been associated with Alzheimer's disease and aging in general as well. What we found is that greater minutes spent in what is called moderate to vigorous physical activity, or MVPA, which is a level of activity where the heart rate goes up a little bit, but it's not so strenuous or vigorous that we couldn't hold a conversation. So this could be like fast walking, for example, would be considered for most people moderate to vigorous physical activity. And we saw that this level of activity was associated with higher cerebral blood flow, in parts of the frontal lobe of the brain that are related to language functions. And the frontal lobe of the brain is also one that is affected by the aging process. So we did see that greater amount of moderate to vigorous physical activity was associated to more blood flow in the frontal lobe of these healthy older adults. And interestingly, we also saw the same pattern when we look at all light physical activity. So even activities that are lighter, that do not get the heart rate up as much. And again, these are everyday activities. And the same was seen with total activity counts, which basically measure the total volume of physical activity, the intensity and the frequency of it. So all levels of physical activity in this observational study were associated with more cerebral blood flow. Interestingly, we also saw that greater time spent being sedentary or not moving or expending energy was associated with lower cerebral blood flow in the frontal lobe, indicating that sedentary time may be a risk factor for poor brain health in older adults. In a different cross-sectional study we recently published with Dr. Catherine Bangen here at UC San Diego, we studied also if MBPA, or again, moderate to vigorous physical activity, or lighter activities were associated with memory performance and executive function performance in 43 older adults with healthy cognition. Their average age was about 72 years, and it was a sample of mostly women. We actually found that greater everyday accelerometer measured moderate to vigorous physical activity was associated with better memory performance on the graph on the left, as well as better executive function performance that we can see on the graph on the right. We also found in the same study that greater accelerometer measure MBPA was associated with lower white matter hyperintensity volume in the frontal lobe, which is reflective of small vessel cerebrovascular disease. And also, these white matter hyperintensities increase the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. So even after considering all light levels of activity, we saw that those with higher levels of moderate to vigorous physical activity showed lower white matter hyperintensities. So this is also, again, correlating with better brain health. So in summary, from this observational study, we saw that everyday physical activity measured with research-grade accelerometers was associated with cerebral blood flow in regions that are affected by aging, mainly the frontal lobe, and that greater physical activity of all intensities, lighter intensities as well as moderate to vigorous intensity, was beneficial to blood flow. We also saw that sedentary time was detrimental to cerebral blood flow in the frontal lobe of older adults. So MBPA, or moderate to vigorous activity, seems necessary to have a positive impact on cognitive function and cerebrovascular lesions. And we also learned that mobile health technology can be useful to measure brain health in everyday activities in people's own natural environments. So all of the studies that I just reviewed were observational in nature, and participants were not asked to change anything about their physical activity levels. But we wanted to learn if we can use mobile health technology to help older adults increase the time they spend in MBPA in their natural environments, because it is recommended that older adults perform at least 150 minutes of MBPA per week to maintain good vascular health. So we wanted to see if we could help older adults exercise independently using these mobile health technologies to support that change. So the National Institute on Aging funded a small randomized controlled trial that we conducted in my lab. It was called the Independent Walking for Brain Health Study. And this was an intervention that used mobile health technology to help older adults adhere to moderate intensity physical activity in their free living environments, to try to help them to reach 150 minutes per week of moderate activity. This was an intervention that lasted 12 weeks. Participants received an exercise prescription that was individualized to each person. We provided them with a watch that tracked their heart rate in real time. And it also provided just-in-time feedback, which means that when participants were deviating from their prescribed heart rate target zone that was equivalent to moderate intensity activity for each participant, the watch vibrated and also showed different color lights to remind the participants that they needed to adjust their walking pace. So in this way, the watch was acting as a coach to help maintain MBPA during free living exercise sessions. And that helped the participants to be able to walk faster or exercise harder while they were exercising independently. So this is just the different components of the intervention, the physical activity condition. So again, the prescriptions were individualized to each person. They all underwent a treadmill test where we were able to see what specific heart rate range was equivalent to MBPA for each person. And this is what we prescribed to every participant. So we asked them to keep their heart rate above their minimum that would be considered moderate physical activity during their exercise sessions. This little device on the second bubble, number 2, shows the device that we used that showed the heart rate during workouts and also provided that just-in-time feedback that I talked about. The participants also received regular phone calls from the study staff to see how they were doing, to work through any barriers that they may be experiencing. And they also received weekly progress emails that showed how many minutes they spent in moderate to vigorous physical activity for that specific week. We had a control condition that was a healthy aging education condition. Participants assigned to this condition received a reading prescription of different healthy aging topics, and they had weekly quizzes online to see if they were reading the materials, and they also received the same amount of monitoring phone calls than the physically active group. So we randomized 22 participants to the control condition and 21 to the exercise condition. As you can see on the table on the top right, 19 participants completed the control condition and 17 completed the exercise condition. The average age was about 72 years and 74% of the participants were women. We collected, as you can see on the table on the bottom, at the baseline session, we collected the fitness testing or cardiovascular testing, where we determined the heart rate ranges for each participant that were equivalent to MBPA so that we could put that in their exercise prescription. We did a 1-week accelerometer measuring period where the participants wore that red device that I showed earlier on their hip for a week, so that we could capture how much physical activity they were doing before and after the intervention and be able to corroborate the findings from the device that they were wearing on their wrist. They did cognitive testing at 3 time points, brain MRI to look at cerebral blood flow and brain structure at baseline and 12 weeks. And then for the intervention adherence to see if participants were in fact, performing the physical activity that they wanted to be doing based on their individualized plan. We had the watch that measured heart rate during every single free living exercise session. So what I'm showing here are the number of minutes that participants spent in their individualized heart rate targets that were equivalent to moderate levels of physical activity. And you can see that at the first week of the study, the participants, based on the data from the watch that they had, the heart rate tracking watch, they had about 144 minutes of what would be considered moderate levels of physical activity for each participant during week 1. And this increased to 282 minutes by the end of the intervention at week 12. So from the device that they wore on their wrist, we could see that participants significantly increased the amount of time they spent in MBPA, thanks to this watch that reminded them to exercise harder or walk faster when they were going outside of their individualized heart rate target. We also corroborated this with the accelerometer findings. And so what you can see here is the accelerometer data that we gathered at the baseline, at the middle of the intervention, and then again at 12 weeks. And the line on the top shows the significant difference that we see in moderate to vigorous physical activity levels measured by the accelerometer. The line on the bottom is the control participants. So the control group increased their MBPA from about 21 minutes per day to 25 minutes per day at the end of the intervention, whereas the intervention group, the physical activity group, they increased their activity from about 26 minutes a day to about 44.1 minutes a day. And that was about a 67% increase for those in the exercise condition. So there were no significant differences in brain blood flow or cognition between the groups, but in general, there was a pattern of lower CBF and cognition over time in the exercisers that we plan to explore in a larger and longer intervention, because 12 weeks is not really long enough to see significant changes or clinically meaningful changes in cognition. And the CBF responses were very, very variable in this study. As you can see on the graph on the right, this shows the change in the hippocampal blood flow from baseline to post-intervention in all of the participants. And as we can see, there's people who increased a lot, there's people who decreased a lot. And so we really need to explore this in a longer term intervention, at least 6 months, where we can really stabilize our cognitive responses and our cerebral blood flow responses. But at least we learned from this small pilot study that this is a feasible study, and that we are able to collect all of these measures from exercise that people are doing independently. What we did see is when we looked at the participants in the exercise group only, we saw that those with greater improvements in their cardiorespiratory fitness measured with the treadmill test also showed improvements in memory performance over time. So this is again looking just within those who exercise, where greater changes in cardiorespiratory fitness were associated with better memory performance over time. And this was not the case for those in the control group. And we saw something similar for the people who increased the time they spent in moderate to vigorous physical activity measured with the accelerometer. So those who had more improvements in MBPA also showed greater frontal lobe thickness. So the thickness of the gray matter in the frontal lobe increased in the people in the exercise condition who increased their levels of physical activity. So now that we've established that mobile health devices can help older adults exercise independently and that exercise is associated with better brain health, the next step for my research group was to focus on designing culturally adapted interventions to help Latino and Latina older adults to reduce their risk of dementia through improving their physical activity. So as we know, Hispanics or Latinos are at increased risk of Alzheimer's disease compared to non-Hispanic white adults. And since Alzheimer's disease will nearly triple by the year 2060, and this will be paired with a large increase in the older Latino population of the United States, we really need interventions to reduce dementia risk in this group, and there are not many. So along with my colleague, Dr. Dory Rosenberg at Kaiser Permanente in Washington, we wanted to decide a remote physical activity intervention to remove transportation barriers that Latino participants tend to undergo, and it makes it difficult for them to participate in research studies. We wanted to test the feasibility of such intervention and culturally adapt it to the Latino community of Southern California specifically. Importantly, we wanted the intervention to be community engaged by gathering a community advisory board, conducting a pre-post pilot with 10 participants from the Latino community, and gathering their feedback about the measures, the intervention content, and the mobile health devices in focus groups. We would then finalize the cultural adaptation and run a larger randomized controlled trial to test the efficacy of the intervention for increasing physical activity in free living environments. Then, we would learn from those participants and further optimize and change the intervention to continue the cultural adaptation process. So the program that we devised was 100% remote. So it was all conducted via phone calls, mailings, and emails. We had 2 health coaching phone calls to build self-efficacy. We asked participants to identify a support person, could be a family member or a loved one that could help them reach their physical activity goals. We also gave the participants this is the small pilot trial with 10 participants. We gave them a Fitbit Inspire band for coaching. We asked them to help them to identify ways to sit less throughout the day and move more, finding enjoyable physical activities in the community, and also we're coaching them through how to get their heart rate up. So there were 2 steps to the intervention. The first step would be to sit less and move more, as you can see on the bottom right of the screen, by adding about 500 steps a day, more than the participants were usually doing. And then after reaching those goals, we would move to step 2, which would be the keeping fit phase, and adding, the goal would be to add 15 minutes of exercise per day that gets your heart rate beating harder. Those would be the moderate intensity physical activity minutes. So after we did this 3-week pre-post pilot, we conducted 2 focus groups. And 9 out of the 10 participants attended the focus groups, which were conducted in Spanish. Participants answered semi-structured questions about the program. Then we transcribed and coded all the themes to try to identify both positive and negative aspects of participation, to learn what can be improved, and to identify barriers and facilitators to exercise for the participants who completed the pilot. And we worked on this and we identified key themes for the cultural adaptation process. We learned that people really loved the program and they felt that it improved their physical activity, but also their mental health. They did report a lot of mental health benefits. The participants also liked that they felt heard and that this was a program that was specifically being adapted for the brain health of Latino participants in Southern California. They really loved the coaching sessions. They liked the Fitbit. There were some technical problems, but they did like it. They would have liked more Zoom options for the calls so they could see the coach face-to-face, for example. Some skin irritation from the mobile health devices, the accelerometers were reported. The participants wanted the materials to be very organized, and they also showed a desire for more social elements because this intervention is remote and very individualized. And so they did really want to feel a sense of community. So based on the feedback from the participants, we did a lot of adaptations which we will now test in our larger randomized control trial with 130 participants, for which we are currently recruiting. Some of the changes we made were, and I'm showing the picture here of one of the students that was working on these changes, Andrea Vargas. And we changed, for example, the actigraph we changed the devices that we use to measure physical activity from an active pulse to an actigraph to try to avoid the skin irritation problems that the participants reported. We also are now going to offer group activity options for those participants who want to feel that sense of community. So even though we cannot provide classes or a place specifically for individuals to exercise in a group, what we will do is give them a list of available resources that are free of charge near their area, so they can seek that group and community feel. We are now added Zoom as an option for coaching calls, so participants can now opt to do their coaching sessions either via telephone only or via Zoom if they would like. We've made instructional videos on how to use the Fitbit, how to set it up in both English and Spanish, as well as very detailed instructions to help the participants with the technical problems that they may encounter during the Fitbit use for the intervention. We will be communicating primarily through text messaging for reminders of appointments, etc., because that was also something that the participants reported that was beneficial. And we will be working to make a more organized workbook so that all of the materials are easy to understand. I also wanted to finalize it by saying that our team is very bicultural and bilingual, and that has been really a success as part of this cultural adaptation process and being able to really connect with the participants and learn from them and be able to do all of the testing in English and Spanish and have all of the materials in English and Spanish. So in terms of our learning objectives, we wanted to learn about how physical activity can impact brain and cognitive health in free living environments. And basically, free living, light and moderate levels of physical activity are beneficial to cerebral blood flow. And moderate activity seems to be needed for cognitive and cerebrovascular benefits above and beyond the benefits to blood flow. So can we help older adults exercise independently for their brain health using mobile health technology? The answer seems to be yes, that mobile health devices and heart rate-based exercise prescriptions can significantly increase free living moderate activity in older adults, which can then translate into cognitive and brain benefits. And we wanted to learn about considerations for cultural adaptation of interventions to promote brain health. And I discussed how community engagement is crucial for the cultural adaptation process to design interventions that can help older Latinos reduce the risk of dementia. And I wanted to thank all of my team and collaborators, as well as the National Institutes on Aging for the funding provided for these studies. Thank you very much.